Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. You got a dream, you got to protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it. Period. Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Tatum.
And I'm Geneva.
We are two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. Hi, Geneva. Welcome back.
Hi, Tatum.
I'm excited for our discussion today. I'm very excited. I feel like I already have an idea of where this discussion's going to go. Ooh. And I'm pumped for it. So
all right. I'm very excited.
Yeah. But before we jump into that, can you share with us anything you've been watching this week, or I guess in the last few days?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I actually have watched a few things. I caught up with two older films that have been on my list for a while. So I watched a movie called A Place in the Sun from the early 50s, starring Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor. It's a drama.
Are you on an Elizabeth Taylor kick? I feel like you've been watching Elizabeth Taylor movies recently. Or am I making that up?
I did watch.
Wasn't she in like some ensemble movie you watched?
I did watch that 80s Agatha Christie adaptation a few weeks ago with Elizabeth Taylor. Did I watch something else with her?
Didn't you watch something that had like 500 million actors in it that you kept sending me all those snaps? And I was like, I don't know who any of these people are. Wasn't Elizabeth Taylor in that?
Yeah, she was. She was the, well, I shouldn't spoil it, I guess. But yeah, that was the 80s Agatha Christie adaptation.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, with every single person from classic Hollywood, just like 30 years later.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so I watched A Place in the Sun, which is a drama directed by George Stevens. It is, it's a very good movie. It's based on a novel called An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser. And basically it's about this young man who is he's recruited to work in his wealthy uncle's company, but at first he's kind of lowest man on the totem pole. His uncle doesn't really take an interest in him, so even though he's got the family name, he's just kind of in there with the rest of the workers, and he starts this relationship with a woman he works with. But then his uncle starts to take notice of him, and he's very ambitious, and so he's kind of moving up the pole, and he's falling in love with Elizabeth Taylor, who's this glamorous, wealthy socialite.
Elizabeth Taylor playing a glamorous, wealthy socialite?
Must have been a real stretch for her. But anyway, yeah, so it takes some twists and turns. I really love Montgomery Clift. I don't know, Tatum, if you've seen any Montgomery Clift movies that you can, like...
I'd have to look up who that even is, so maybe.
He is an actor who was in that original generation of method actors, along with people like Marlon Brando or James Dean. And he's just a really wonderful actor. He's been in some classic movies, but I think he's not quite as much remembered now as someone like Brando or Dean. I think he's very underrated. I think he's really, really wonderful, and he's great in this movie. In particular, I think so. Oh
no, never mind. Go ahead. I'm
okay.
Gonna cut that
I've probably recommended quite a few Montgomery Clift movies. Maybe we'll do some at some point. I would love to do From Here to Eternity. Yeah, I really love that movie.
I mean, it looks like he's in one movie that has Katharine Hepburn in it, and I love Katharine Hepburn. So
yeah, which one is that?
It's apparently called Suddenly Last Summer from 1959.
I have heard of that movie, never seen it, did not know he was in it. So, all right, I'll have to see that too.
Anyway.
Yeah, so it's just this movie that's kind of, the dark side of the American dream kind of thing, 1950s deconstructing the idea of wealth and glamour and social progress. And, I always love those kinds of themes. But yeah, it's a good movie. I would definitely recommend it. I also watched an Alfred Hitchcock movie called Foreign Correspondent. which is very much basically like it's from 1940. It's very much a sort of propaganda film trying to get the U.S. into the war, but it's also just kind of a fun adventure lark. It's definitely not top tier Hitchcock, but I enjoyed it, for what it was. It's got George Sanders, who I love, playing a good guy, which he so rarely does. So that's always fun to see. And then I rewatched Persuasion, the 1995 Persuasion with Kieran Hines and Amanda Root. Amanda Root, is that her name? Anyway, it's such a good adaptation of Persuasion. I just recently reread the novel, and I was very impressed rewatching it, how faithful it is.
And you hated the Netflix one, right?
Oh, yeah.
I haven't seen it, so
the Netflix one is an atrocity.
Okay.
It should not be called Persuasion.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I've been watching this week.
Gotcha. Nice. So I've watched a few things. Let me just pull this up real quick. Yeah, so I rewatched the classic Eddie Murphy comedy Coming to America.
Ooh, I just saw that for the first time like 3 months ago.
Yeah, I
so
hadn't seen it in a while, and it's such a funny movie. It's just like, I remember, having it on the TV in the background when I was little, and it was never really a movie that I sat down and watched from start to finish. I would just kind of catch clips of it while, I heard somebody laughing in the other room. But this movie's really good. I think it's really funny. For some reason, I feel like it's a comedy that, I don't know if it's been forgotten, but I just don't hear it talked about as much. But I think it's really good. I don't think it's like a 3-star comedy. I think it's like a 4.5-star comedy, in my opinion. So I had a really good time with it. I kind of miss Eddie Murphy. He,
absolutely.
he's still in things, and he's done some great stuff in the last few years. But there's just something about like the era of Eddie Murphy that was like the 80s into the early 2000s that I really miss. So it was nice to journey back to that.
I think my favorite part of that movie, which I wasn't expecting, was the father of the love interest. I just found him so funny. I forget the name of that actor, but
it's
he was great.
Oh my gosh, I'm kicking myself. I need to know his name. He's like one of the most famous Black male actors of all time. John Amos.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. We were talking about him just recently, and that sparked it in my mind. I was like,
I feel like
so good in Coming to America.
I feel like I should be put in jail for not remembering his name off the top of my head. It's
How
like
dare
a crime.
You. Straight to jail.
I'm honestly embarrassed. But anyway, yeah, he's fantastic. It's just a great movie. James Earl Jones, I just love him so much. But yeah, it's a great film. So yeah, that was one thing I watched. I also watched David Lynch's Lost Highway. And I realized it was a movie that I thought I'd seen before, and then I turned it on and I was like, oh wait, I haven't seen this movie. So it's interesting. It's a classic David Lynch mindfuck movie of just like, what am I supposed to understand? I don't think so. So it's good. My review of it on Letterboxd was this movie walked so that Mulholland Drive could run. Because I really felt like this was something where he was toying with ideas that he had in his brain, but they weren't fully really formed yet. And so it has kind of similar vibes of Mulholland Drive, but it's not as focused, in my opinion. Also, there's like a lot more, in my opinion, unnecessary sex in Lost Highway. I'm like, okay, this is a lot. It's not explicit, but it's a lot. So yeah, I would say it's worth watching. I think anything made by David Lynch is worth watching, honestly. But it's not, in my opinion, top tier of his, but still I'm glad I watched it.
Does it have any of the actors that he has worked with many times over the years?
No, there's no Laura Dern. It's very much so. I mean, Patricia Arquette is kind of one of the main protagonists, but a lot of the core actors he hasn't worked with in other things, as far as I know from what I've seen. But a lot of his movies have a lot of cast members in them, so I could be missing something. But yeah. And then the last thing that I watched, I watched the 1998 film Gia, which is one of Angelina Jolie's like breakout-ish roles. She was really in a lot of things at this time, establishing herself as like this up and coming actress. And so she's the star of this film. She plays Gia. I forget Gia's last name, but she was she's considered to be, I think, the first supermodel that ever existed. It
must be a stretch for Angelina Jolie.
I know, it must be a real stretch. But it's basically about this young woman who had a very tragic life, and she died at the age of 26 from, I think they ended up finding out later on that it was AIDS or something, but she got some sort of disease from heavy heroin drug use and drug addiction. But anyway, I enjoyed it. I think it is kind of a classic biopic type of vibe where it's like, okay, here's the star and their explosion, and now here's their downfall, and here's where they end up. Except hers has more of a tragic ending than like a reunited at the end, and it feels so good. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't think I'll watch it again because it's kind of depressing. Her relationship with her mom is awful. Her mom is really an emotionally manipulative person, and it's not really enjoyable to watch. But it was fine. I'm glad I watched it. I think if Angelina Jolie had not given the incredible performance that she did, the movie would have been a lot more very basic in terms of, its format.
She's I was going to say underrated actress, which seems very strange to say because she is so, incredibly well known and respected. But I feel like she doesn't often get roles that really allow her to showcase her talent.
I agree.
And yeah, it sounds like this is a really good role for her.
This was the first thing I'd seen her in other than Changeling that really impressed me. And in Changeling, not that her performance is bad in that movie, but she does a lot of crying of just like, oh my gosh, she's good at crying. She's good at crying. She's good at crying. And she is good at crying. And she gives a great performance in that movie. But this one was a lot more, I felt like we were seeing lots of different sides of her. So yeah, I would recommend Gia if you're an Angelina Jolie fan or you like biopics. It's a pretty run-of-the-mill biopic that's got some good performances. So yeah, I've also been continuing my watch of BoJack Horseman, which is also depressing, but it's a very good show. So but yeah, that's what I've been watching. And just to put this out there, Geneva, I would love you to hold me accountable on this, but I made a pact with nobody other than myself this week. But I have challenged myself to go a whole month only watching things. I've started this after watching Gia and Lost Highway. But I have decided to go a month only watching things where the cast is majority people of color. Because white people are fine, but I am kind of sick of seeing them on screen. And I know that there's lots of other things that exist that showcase people that are not white, whether that's international cinema or movies from America or whatever. I'm going to try and challenge myself to that for at least a month and maybe longer, depending on how fruitful it tends to be. But whether it's a TV show or a movie or whatever, I'm like, nope. Majority of the cast it has to be people of color. No more white people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have like a list in place of kind of blind spots that you've been interested in?
Kind of.
Watching?
I mean, I have where I'm starting is I'm going through my Letterboxd list of like my watch list because there's a lot of things on my watch list that I know are already, people of color dominant. So I think I'm going to take those and put them into a separate list and kind of build from there. But I don't have like one specific list. They're kind of just like mixed into other lists. But I want to break them off and compile them. So, yeah, I'm super pumped about it. I think it's going to be a fun adventure. So,
yeah, that's exciting.
So yeah, anyway, but that's what I've been watching. That's what Geneva's been watching. So let's go ahead and jump into our discussion of The Pursuit of Happyness today. So, yeah, so today on the show, we will be discussing The Pursuit of Happyness, Italian filmmaker Gabriele Muccino's 2006 debut English-speaking film starring Will and Jaden Smith. And when I say debut English-speaking film, he had made other movies prior to this, but they were all in Italian. This was his first film in English. With Chris Oh, yeah. So with Chris Gardner himself serving as an executive producer, the film tells the, albeit Hollywoodized, true story of Chris Gardner as he fights against all odds to overcome poverty and provide for his young son. When Chris finds himself hitting rock bottom, he begins to pursue a career as a stockbroker by participating in a 6-month internship. Though we all know from the outset how the story will end, the film takes us through many obstacles along the way. And it should be mentioned that the movie did, obviously take several liberties in telling Gardner's story, and that several events that were shown to have taken place over just a few months actually occurred over several years. And then another modified detail is that though Gardner's son in the film, portrayed by Jaden Smith, is 5 years old, in real life, his son was only a toddler at the time that he was going through this internship. So just
a couple years difference, but
yeah. So I just thought that it was worth mentioning. Like I said, it's with movies like this, you always know when it says based on a true story, there's a lot of things that are Hollywoodized, but
things like compressing timeline, that's just, for the sake of everyone's sanity, it can be just helpful sometimes to make it a little bit more understandable.
Yes, very much so. Though Gardner was initially hesitant to be portrayed by Will Smith, he was convinced by his daughter to give him a shot. And ultimately, the success of the film is seen by many to be owed to Smith's captivating performance alongside his son, Jaden Smith. So this movie was a success financially because with a budget of $55 million, it ended up earning over $307 million worldwide.
Wow.
So that's a pretty big, that's pretty big earning there. So
can I ask, did you come across the reason he was hesitant to be portrayed by Will Smith?
The one thing that I saw was that, so it was a very brief thing that I read, but it said something along the lines of like, he just didn't think that Will could do it. And then his daughter was like, hey, if he can play Muhammad Ali, he can play you. And then Chris was like, all right. Okay. But that's the extent of what I saw. How about if you let this handsome, charismatic
movie star play you in a movie?
Yeah, like who was, really killing it at the time. I mean, he was
incredible actor.
Yeah. So that's some of the, preliminary research that I did. So I'll go ahead and start us off by sharing my relationship with this movie. So this was a movie that I honestly watched a bunch as a kid. I don't know. I feel like maybe this has been established on this podcast by this point, but the family that I grew up in, there was a lot of emphasis on working as hard as you can to get what you want. You put in 1,000,000% towards everything and you do the best you can do at everything you do. You might not be the best, but you need to do your personal best in everything. And I, not in an unhealthy way. It was in a healthy way that we were taught that. But so this movie definitely really taps into this like core value that has been instilled in me by my parents growing up. And so watching this movie again, it's been a long time since I've watched this movie. Probably like, I don't know, definitely over 10 years. It's been a long time. And it still impacts me today as much as it did then. I think that, obviously there's certain things about it that are, really trying to get you to feel the feels. But I'm fine with that because I think the core message of this is really strong and it's really important. And it doesn't feel manipulative to me. It feels genuine. So yeah, I don't know. I just remember watching this when I was little and there were very specific moments that still stick out in my brain in terms of, the quote that I read at the beginning of this movie and the moment between Chris and his son where they're in the homeless shelter and his son looks at him and he says, "You're a good papa," and all of these things. This movie is very moving and very touching. And I find that the older that I've gotten, especially now I have a 5-year-old niece. I was nervous after Begin Again. I was like, oh no, is this going to be another movie that I've chosen that I remember super fondly? And then I watched it again. I'm like, oh no, this is like super, cheesy and whatever. And just like, not as good as I remember. But I love this movie. It's not a perfect film and I could see why people would, have complaints with it. But for me, none of those issues matter. I think this is a really powerful film, and I think the performances are strong. And yeah, it just taps into a lot of Tatum things, I feel like. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of, my relationship with it and what I feel about it now. So how about you? Like I said, I have an idea of where I think this conversation is going to go, but I'm curious if I am correct in that. So yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
very curious what your idea of where the conversation is gonna go is. So this is my second time watching the movie. The first time I saw it, I think I had mentioned to you off mic, Tatum. I was randomly in like a freshman year of high school English class. I think maybe it was one of those days where we just had a big test and the professor wanted to give us a chance to relax. And so she just put on this movie that was kind of, this is an inspirational movie. You guys can just watch it for a couple classes.
Mm-hmm.
So I had seen it before. There are a few things that had stood out in my memory. I remembered the Rubik's Cube scene in the car. I remembered the scene at the train station, and then the train station bathroom where the two of them are pretending that they've gone back in time. And I remember really thinking that Jaden Smith is giving a really incredible child performance, and the chemistry between the two of them is so natural. Like, I love their chemistry so much. Yeah, so rewatching it, I did not really remember anything else about this movie. I was a little nervous going in because I was like, I don't know, I have this vague like I watched it in high school, like maybe it's kind of cheesy, and
I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. But I was very impressed. Like, this, I actually do not think this movie is cheesy. Like, it could easily tip over in that direction, like the terrible trailer that Tatum rewatched before we started recording. But I actually think, and so much of it is because of Will Smith's performance and how grounded and restrained, the way he shows emotion, the way he shows his determination, his, the way you can sense how frustrated he is with his situations, but he has to put all that aside in order to take care of his son. Like, it's an incredible performance. And I think the tone of the movie really does a great job of supporting that and bringing that out. So I'm honestly very conflicted about this movie in a weird way, because I think for itself, it's a really good movie. It's an incredible Will Smith performance. It's an incredible success story. It's a beautiful message. It's a beautiful relationship that between father and son that's being shown. I just struggle because for things that aren't really the movie's fault or the fault of the story itself, that idea of, work hard, pick yourself up by the bootstraps, American dream. Like, I think over time, as we've seen, there are limitations to people's ability to do that. And there are just systematic things that keep people from being able to do that. And this story is a story of overcoming a lot of those obstacles. And it's an incredible story, but the movie is not really interested in interrogating the system that has kept him and many others like him in poverty. And so I struggle because I'm like, this is an incredible story that deserves to be told. But also I wish the movie leaned just a little bit harder into examining kind of the larger context. And, it is a movie where the definition of success is becoming a wealthy stockbroker in the 80s, which, from today's perspective is maybe not the greatest position in society for the good of society to be. So yeah, I don't know. I really struggle with this movie because I like it for itself. I think it's doing everything right. I feel like there are kind of larger contextual things that I'm a little bit conflicted about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So my prediction was correct.
Oh, good to know.
My well, I mean, maybe not, you tell me, but my prediction was that both of us would see, for lack of a better word, like the goodness and the badness in this movie. But for me, it wouldn't matter. And for you, it would cause you to be lukewarm on the film. That was my prediction. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think that we'll be able to engage with it, because I think this movie, I really want to get into this, but I think that this movie, it's an inspirational film. And I think that is the purpose of it. It is meant to inspire people and not, I mean, obviously people can read things in their own way, and there's probably people that could read this in a destructive way, but I'm not seeing it as an argument that like anyone can do this and you should do this because it'll work out for you if you just try harder. I don't see that as the message. I see it as like, this is a possibility of what could happen, so still have hope, you know, and it asks this question of maybe happiness is only something you can pursue, and is that worth it, and things like that. And so I think that the movie is inspiring. It's not a blueprint, in my opinion. And also, I think something that I would really like to talk about is that this movie is not, in my opinion, it's not something that shies away from Christopher Gardner's flaws. Because I find myself watching it this time around, I was like, okay, he definitely, like, they've been down on their luck for a while. Why are they still living in this huge ass apartment in San Francisco? They should have left this apartment a long time ago before they had no money left. Like, why are they still living here? And, you know, there's certain instances where I do see that his pride does get in the way, and he's not willing to, you know, necessarily take steps that might actually be healthier. And I do wonder, you know, the arguments of Christopher is staying with me, and then he tells his, I guess now ex-wife, you know you can't take care of him. And I'm like, is that actually true? Like, I don't know. She's got a job and she's going to go live with her sister, and that might be more stable. You know, it's just, there's things where I'm like, okay, I could see how he doesn't feel like this perfect Jesus character who's doing everything right and we should follow his lead and do as he does. He seems like a fully formed person to me. And also, sorry, I'm kind of rambling to start off, but
that's okay.
Another thing I want to talk about, because again, like, I think you and I both agree that this movie could have been very cheesy, but it's not, you know? And I think that I don't know. I just would love to talk about this concept of, because I found myself watching it, I was like, you know, he's aspiring to be this stockbroker. Stockbrokers aren't necessarily like the best people, especially given what we know about like what happened after this time.
I mean, the Wolf of Wall Street is set around this time, right?
I know. So it's just like, you know, I mean, and also this idea of he's looking at all these people and they have all this money, and, you know, I don't know, but that's why I like the question of him constantly wrestling with like the pursuit of happiness. Like, money, does it equal happiness? It might not. It might. We don't know. Like, but I'm just pursuing it and we'll see what happens. And ultimately, I feel like this movie more so communicates that like hard work is worth undergoing, as opposed to money is what you should be working toward. I feel like that's more so the message. And then there was one last thing that I wanted to say, and then I was going to shut up. What's the last thing? I don't remember.
Well, we can start talking through some of the things you've said already, and then it'll probably come back to you.
Yeah. So I guess, do you have any, I guess, like, comments on any of the things that I just said?
Like trying to like remember everything that you said.
It's not like I just went on a ramble for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was all good things. It's all good things. So I'm just like, wait. Yeah, well, I guess just to start with the character of Chris Gardner, as played by Will Smith. Not Will Ferrell, Will Smith.
Yes, Will Smith.
It is interesting that you say that on the second viewing, or not second viewing, your like millionth viewing, but first viewing in quite a while, that you felt like you were picking up more on the way the movie portraying his flaws. Because I didn't feel like the movie was making an effort to dig into his flaws, which is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Because again, this is a movie that's meant to inspire, like that is the purpose of the movie. And when you have a movie where so much of the conflict is coming from these outside obstacles, you don't necessarily need the hero to also be overcoming immense personal issues and things like that. But I don't know, I did feel like the movie was I do feel like Chris Gardner is played in a very positive light, where it is maybe sanding over some. I mean, I know nothing. I've never read the original memoir or autobiography that this is based on. I don't know anything about the real man or whatever his flaws may or may not be. So I'm assuming he has some because everyone does. But I did feel like the movie is kind of intentionally shying away from any area where we might see him be really flawed, apart from one or two moments where he kind of gets frustrated and maybe yells at his son or something like that, which is understandable. But I do think, I mean, again, the performance of Will Smith is so good that it doesn't really become that much of an issue because he does feel like a really believable three-dimensional person. Because you have this incredible actor who's inhabiting him and who is portraying his frustrations and his his tensions and his hopelessness and his determination at different moments in such a believable way.
Yeah, I find that interesting. I mean, I agree with you in that I don't think that the movie goes super in depth on his flaws, but I like the fact that, at least in the way that I watched it, they exist. I think, like I said before, I think the fact that he lives in that huge apartment as long as they do, I'm like, that's a problem. Like, is he sitting down and having a really long conversation about it? No, but I don't think we need to, because it's very obvious that this place is huge. Like, you don't need this. Clearly you've been struggling for a while and you still live here. Like, and clearly your wife, or I guess we never know if they're actually married. They never say that, but baby mama, whether they're married or not, but she seems fed up. Like, it seems like she has tried to stick around for a while and ultimately she's like, I can't do this anymore. And I don't necessarily want to go super in depth on whether she's whether that's a good decision or a bad decision, because I don't think we see enough about her to be able to know.
Actually, I did kind of want to get your thoughts on the character of Linda, and also the performance of Thandiwe Newton. Because I generally really like Thandiwe Newton as an actress. I think she's a really excellent actress. I did feel like the movie is kind of portraying her in a more negative light in order to give us more sympathy with Chris, which, is like a narrative necessity. But I was also like, I don't know, Linda has some really good points here. Like, from the beginning, they are in these dire financial straits because of this business decision that he made. And, even though that one didn't pan out, clearly it does show character traits that he will later display and will later allow him to become successful. But I also understood her frustration with, we're in this terrible situation and it's mainly your fault, and I'm constantly having to pick up the slack because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see her being portrayed in a negative light, in my opinion. Because like you're saying, I think that the movie makes it clear that she's making some pretty good points. And at the same time, I think the movie does show that she does genuinely care about her son. Like, she doesn't just leave. She takes her son with her because she thinks that, I want to find happiness for myself, but I also want to bring my son into that with me. And then, before she leaves to go to New York, she's like, I want to pick him up from school. I want to take him to the park. And she seems genuinely upset that she's leaving him behind. But she, when he tells her, you can't take care of him, she, believes that if this is what's best for my son to leave him here, then I'm willing to let him go and be selfless in that way for his greater good. I think that in any sort of breakup between parents of a child, there is going to be a natural tendency to be like, okay, let's point fingers in some way, shape, or form. And I think that that's only natural, but I think the movie could have villainized her a lot more than it did. And I think that she seems like a well-rounded, complex person who's just trying to do her best with what she's got. And, I don't feel like the movie is taking a firm stance on she's a good person or a bad person, or she made the right decision or the wrong decision. I think it just is like, this is a woman who's a mother. She's in difficult circumstances. She's fed up with her partner because he's made some unwise decisions. She's tried to stick around as long as she can, and this is where she's ended up. And she loves her son, And, you know, maybe that's the best that she can do. And I don't think it shames her for that. So I don't know. I kind of like how they treat her in this movie, to be honest. And obviously, like, I'm watching it through my own biased lens, but in certain ways we see what we want to see. But yeah.
Yeah. I guess to me, she never really felt like a character. She more felt like a plot device to get him to that situation where he has a son and he's a single parent. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's necessarily the fault of Tandy Way Newton. I think it's just kind of, you know, narrative utility to tell the story that they need to tell.
Yeah. I mean, would you just rather have not had her be in it at all? Because I feel like she needs to be in the movie. I feel like it's important that she's there. But
yeah, I don't know. It would require changing a few things about the beginning, but I don't think it would radically change the story that develops later on. So I don't know. It's hard to say.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess I think like as we go through the plot, kind of, we can tap into different, you know, mm-hmm. aspects of how this reflects society or whatever as we go along. But one thing that I really wanted to say, which maybe this was the thing I forgot to say before, but in one of the early parts of the movie, when Chris kind of starts his descent into really, you know, hitting rock bottom, I don't remember specifically when this happens, but he's walking through the streets of New York and he sees all of these people coming out of... Oh, sorry. Yeah, San Francisco. My bad.
I made that mistake through like 75% of the movie, and then at a certain point it became clear it was San Francisco. Yes. I was very confused.
Yes. It's like my brain autopilot. I'm like, city, movie, New York. Got it.
Wall Street, New York. Yeah.
Yeah. Even though like it is very obviously San Francisco. But anyway, but yeah, there's this moment when you know why I thought that? It's because stockbrokers. I'm like, oh, Wall Street's in New York.
Yeah, but, I know. That was my exact train of thought too.
Yeah. Anyway, so he's walking down the street and he sees all of these stockbrokers and business people coming out of this building. And he says this line of, they all looked so damn happy to me. Mm. And I really liked that concept because I feel like it sets right off the bat this idea that this is the world that Chris is seeing. And it's even seen in the way that the actors and the background people are directed. Like everyone is walking around with these huge smiles and he's surrounded by all these people, and in a way that's not realistic. And so I think that it's very clearly communicating that, like, honestly, a lot of these stockbrokers probably aren't that happy, and these people walking down the street, like, they've all got problems. But Chris doesn't see that. He just sees all of this happiness because that's what he needs to see or what he wants to see. And I really liked how that was established from the very beginning, that this definition of happiness that we are pursuing is Chris's definition of happiness, not the universal definition of happiness. And yeah, I don't know. I really liked that. And that's kind of his motivator for really, you know, starting to pursue Mr. Twistle and then which Twistle, I love that freaking name. And I love how they comment on that in the movie. It's like, with a name like that, he sounds like the happiest person ever. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that and how that was kind of established from the get-go?
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're framing it as this is the movie signaling that what the story we are going to see and these ideas of happiness and success are explicitly subjective ones, that this is not the objective definition of happiness or the one recipe for success and fulfillment. This is one person's story and one person's definition of that. I think it does really help as I looked at the movie, because I remember that moment, and I didn't really like that moment, but because I was coming at it from that perspective of, are we meant to see all of these people as happy? Which is just, I mean, on its face, transparently just not true. Yeah. There's a later scene as well.
No matter the circumstance, no one, like, you're not going to be anywhere like, and everyone's that happy.
Take any slice of the population and, you know, good percentage are not going to be happy at any given moment. There was another moment too where he and his son are just unexpectedly invited into this box to view a football game, or maybe it's a baseball game.
No, it's football.
Okay. And there's just this moment where he's looking around at everyone who's like cheering and clapping, and it is this kind of conflicting moment for me, because it's like, this is Chris looking around and seeing this is the environment that I want to be in. You know, I've made it here. I'm so happy to be here. And now this is what I'm inspiring toward, for this to be my life. And again, it is that conflicting thing where like, I want that for this particular character because he's a good person and he's worked so hard and struggled so much and he deserves it. But then on the other hand, like,
is he going to be the next Jordan Belfort?
Yeah, certainly hope not. But actually, one other thing about that moment that you pointed out, him on the steps, thinking about how all the other people who work in that building look so happy. I did also, though, think about this idea of sort of happiness and your fulfillment or your situation in life, your ability to kind of the way that you act, being constrained very much by your financial situation, in the sense that if you're in a position of constant financial instability and housing instability, like, is there really any way that you can be happy there because you are so focused on survival? It made me think of Parasite, that moment where the family there's this one line in Parasite where one member of the poor family says, like, you know, if I had this much money, I would be nice all the time. You know, it's this idea that niceness or happiness or, you know, these things we regard as good are kind of dependent on someone's situation and their financial or their class situation. So I did find that to be like a really interesting kind of perspective that this movie opens up. So yeah, again, like, you know, it is interesting. I am conflicted. This movie asks all these really interesting, conflicting questions, and it's very much a sort of movie that you can look at from one prism and see one thing, and it does that really well. And then you look at it from another prism and it's maybe a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, like, for example, I wrote another quote down in my notes, which is the moment when Linda comes home for the last time and she's, you know, returning Christopher or whatever. And Chris says to her, he goes, "You are so weak." And in my opinion, there's two ways that you can read that, or maybe there's more ways than that. But in my brain, I'm thinking there's the way as an audience member where you can listen to that and you can agree with him, of like, oh yeah, we're supposed to see that the movie is trying to portray this woman as weak. Or you can see it the way that I interpreted it, which is this is another reflection on Chris being a prideful person, of him not being able to let go of this like dream that he had of having this perfect family and the big apartment and all of these things. It's like, just because she's leaving to go do something else doesn't mean that she's weak. Like, and the fact that you're seeing her that way, and the fact that you're saying it, it's like, I mean, obviously this is a difficult situation and all of us say things we don't mean when we're hard pressed in situations like this. Not that I've ever been in a situation like this, but I would imagine I would probably say things I didn't mean as well. But I think it just shows that he has his own issues and he's not this perfect person. But I guess getting back to what I was saying before, like, there's two different ways you can read that. And I think that this movie really, you know, you can see it through, what did you use, like prism, or what was the phrasing that you used?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the exact correct analogy for this situation, but prism.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, and I also found it very interesting how much this movie tries to define or the different definitions that it offers for what happiness is. Like, is happiness money? Is happiness having a family? Is happiness being able to provide? And then we also see, you know, later on, Chris asks his son, he goes, "Are you happy?" And his son says, "Yes." And so it shows this beauty of like being an innocent child and being happy regardless of all of this other stuff going on, because maybe your definition is more simplistic, or you don't, or maybe it's more profound. Like, I don't know. But I just love how, especially for me, given this phase of my life that I'm in right now, without getting too personal, but like, I've been thinking a lot about happiness and how much does that actually matter? And is it possible? And how do we get it if it is possible and all of those things. And so I just feel like this movie is very relevant to me because of that. But I also think it's relevant for everybody. Like, that's why it's in the Constitution, like, because we're all thinking about, you know, happiness in one way or another. Unless, you know, perhaps there's people, which is another angle. Like, there's people in this movie where they have so much money that they probably don't even think about if they're happy or not, because they don't need to think about it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Like, I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. And there's something too in that I think this movie is actually really, really great about and has a really beautiful message to offer, which is that idea that pursuing happiness for Chris, I think so much of the happiness that he achieves or the happiness that he is pursuing throughout the film is the happiness of caring for another person that he loves and who loves him back, you know, caring for his son and giving up so much for his son, and just the little joys and victories of being able to have these hard-won moments where he and his son can just kind of sit back and talk or laugh or play a game together. You know, these are the things that all the struggles he goes through make those moments so sweet. And I think that's a great message for especially our time, when I feel like we're living in an age where the message that the pursuit of happiness is about individuality and about pursuing your own good above everyone else, and just kind of this sort of isolationist, selfish message, which honestly is a lot of it rooted in the 80s, but not just in the 80s, in you know, for over the course of many decades. And I think in many ways our culture is seeing kind of the effects of that, where
that idea is breaking down.
yeah, it's breaking down our ability to understand how to live in a society that's kind of mutually where people are mutually caring for each other and being willing to sacrifice for each other, and seeing that not as a hardship, but as an opportunity to give and love and be loved in return. And so I think this movie can offer a really sweet, beautiful antidote to all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So I feel like with this movie, kind of like I was saying in the beginning, it is very much so kind of this typical type of, you know, inspirational type of format. And so for me, the thing that really makes it different is not necessarily going through the plot, but more so talking about what types of questions is this plot raising, and what do we see in the performances, and what are the moments in the film that really impacted us and why, you know? And so I guess we can go into that, because that's something that I would love to talk about, because this movie, I have a list on Letterboxd that I think is private because people don't necessarily need to see it, but it's a list of, like, I think I titled it I Cried Like a Baby. And this is one of those movies where I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. I don't really cry very. It's not a common thing for me when I watch movies to cry, especially not multiple times. And this movie, there's several moments where, like, I'm not tearing up. I'm like audibly sobbing.
Yeah.
And so I just think, I don't know if you had any specific moments like that for you, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of dive into those specific moments, and maybe we can be each other's therapists and be
definitely.
like, why do you think you feel that way about this? Like, after watching this scene, let's dig into that. But I mean, I would love to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I teared up at any points in this movie.
Once?
I definitely
once did you tear up?
Wow. I mean, I felt things, absolutely. I didn't have physical tears coming out of my eyes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt things. Well, I did the thing where, which you can tell that I'm getting into a movie emotionally when I have to do this, which is at a particularly low moment, pause the movie and look up the Wikipedia plot summary and be like, he is going to be okay, right? Even though I had fully seen this movie already and knew how it ended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I guess we can dive into my psyche then.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I guess I'll just say for myself, the moments that really impacted me a lot, and I think this is universal. Every time I've watched this movie, it's been these same it's been these same moments. The first one is, it comes fairly late into the movie, but it's when they have that whole imagination sequence in the subway.
So good. Yes.
Just the fact that it comes at this time when I feel like anyone in that circumstance would be so incredibly defeated, because it's like, I've done everything I possibly can. I don't know what else I could do. And even so, like, me and my child don't have a place where we can sleep tonight. And I've never had this happen to me before. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And the fact that in that moment, when it starts at a time when his son is like, where are we going to go? And his first response is, I don't know. And then he's able to go from that to coming up with this really beautiful, magical story to help his son not understand the scariness of what's going on, but also provide joy for him to get him into this space where they can sleep and be safe. And then after they get to that cave and Christopher falls asleep, then we see Chris actually, you know, not being this protective father anymore, but just being this, I'm just a human being who's terrified and doesn't know what to do. And now that there's no one observing me, and there's someone who, I don't know who they are. They could be a safe police officer, or they could be someone who's trying to harm us. I don't know, but someone's trying to get in here and I'm terrified. I just think that progression of that sequence of events and showing all of these different aspects of what he's going through as a person, as a parent, as an individual, all of these different layers, it's just so profound. And I think it's really beautifully written and acted, supremely acted on both of their parts. Even Jaden Smith, the way he looks around, he's like, oh, look at these dinosaurs. You know, it's like, it's so great. But yeah, I just think that sequence is just so moving, and it feels very human.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, there's a reason that was one of the scenes that had stuck with me for, 15 plus years. Is just, it is so beautiful. Again, the chemistry between the two of them is so natural and so fun and light, but also just, there's so much weight and meaning to everything that Will Smith says and does. The way that you can tell at any given moment how he is acting one way for his son, but he is feeling another way himself. And like you said, that moment then when his son has fallen asleep and he's just sitting there cradling him, and the kind of the only protection between him and literally the rest of the world, and his face just without any actual sobbing or any huge displays of emotion, he just breaks down. He looks so scared and so sad and so defeated. And it's just so different from the way that he looks when he's, putting on a performance for his son. And it's incredible. Like that moment really, it got me the first time, and it really, really got me the second time. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think that with a movie like this, in my opinion, it can be pretty easy to overlook the cinematography. But there was one particular shot, two shots here, honestly. Like the first one, when we have the first shot of them in the subway and it's completely empty. Nobody's there except for, Chris and Christopher. And Chris, he almost looks like a silhouette, and the camera's from up high looking down on them, and they look very small. And it's just this really... it's just a shot that makes you feel alone and empty and just isolated with nowhere to go. And I think it's really, I just think it communicates very well what's happening in terms of the emotions of what Chris is feeling. And then, when we have that shot of them in the bathroom, and it's again, like from above looking down on them, when he stretches his foot to close the door or to hold it closed. Thank goodness that door has a lock, by the way. I don't think public bathrooms have locks like that anymore. But yeah, I don't know. I just really like how the camera is used in those moments to really communicate. And another level of how Chris is feeling in those moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I like what you were saying about the contrast here between, you know, when Chris is kind of, he doesn't have an audience and he's just him, right? Versus when he's performing for his son. And I feel like you can also compare it to when he's basically in any scenario he's performing. Every scenario he's performing, because when he's at work, when he's meeting with potential clients, all of these things, he's obviously this super charismatic, personable salesman, you know, and you feel like you know him. He's a very likable, convincing guy who, even when he walks into work and doesn't have a freaking shoe on, everyone's like, oh yeah, Chris just doesn't have a shoe, like whatever, you know. And seeing that contrasted, you know, with this moment, it's so powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah, well, I was going to say we should talk as well about the scene. Well, two scenes, actually. But first, the one that I mentioned had really stuck out to me, which is the scene in the car where he manages to get to get Jay Twistle alone, basically, so that he can try and pitch him on himself, his own application for the internship program. And he ends up impressing him by solving a Rubik's Cube. Mm-hmm. And it's such a good scene because I really like the actor who plays Jay Twistle. I don't know his name, but he is this very kind of just friendly, gregarious guy who, you know, at first he kind of holds himself off from Chris because he probably has a lot of people who are trying to weasel their way into his affections. But there's just something so magnetic about Chris, you know, and something so genuine too. And I love the fact that the way that he's able to stand out from the others is by his, you know, his intelligence. First of all, you know, he's able to do this, to solve this little logic puzzle that no one else can. But also just the kind of, I don't know, showmanship, but also genuineness about it. Like the way that over the course of the taxi ride, as Chris is working on it, and he's not really performing it, you know, he's genuinely, he knows he can solve it, but it's going to take him a bit of time. And it's so cool to see how Jay gets more and more into it and is like encouraging him, and he's checking to see how much further they have to go in the ride.
And the taxi driver gets into it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all like, can he finish it before we pull up at this place where we're going? And the audience gets sucked into it too. You know, we're rooting for him. We're fully on his side.
I feel like during that sequence too, at least what I was seeing, we see Chris getting a little bit more panicked as time goes on, in terms of like, oh my gosh, I have to finish this, because if I don't deliver on what I promised, like there's a lot riding on me being able to solve this Rubik's Cube. And, you know, as I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm really just like in awe of Will Smith's performance in this movie, because you were kind of talking about his relationship with Twistle, which is great. But then I also think about like his moments with, gosh, I'm trying to find out what his name is here. I think it's Mr. Fromm.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 kind of older men at the firm, and they all have very similar faces and names.
Yeah, I think it's Mr. Fromm. But that moment when, this is another moment where I was like, I wasn't sobbing, but I was tearing up at this part. When Fromm asks him to give him $5.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
That acting performance by Will Smith in that moment of being like, I need to give you this money, but I literally only have $8. But if I don't give you this, but like,
yeah,
so many looks flash across his face in such a small amount of time. And when he finally gives him the $5, it feels like he's losing a limb. Like it's like so painful.
Yeah,
to watch.
The movie has done such a good job of building you up to the place where you fully understand every single dollar that goes in and out of his wallet means a huge deal, because it is the difference between the two of them, you know, him and his son having a place to sleep for that night, having dinner to eat that evening. Like, it means so much. And just $5 by that point, it's a punch in the gut.
Yep. Every single scene where him and Christopher actually get to eat a nice meal, I'm like, oh my God. It's like, oh my God, they get to eat. Like, this is so, and it's like it's just something that I feel like we take for granted, of just, you know, because I sit around, I'm like, ugh, I don't want to cook dinner today, like, blah. But then, you know, you look at people in circumstances like this, it's like, no, being able to even have a meal is like huge. And it's so those little moments of happiness, you know, like just being able to sit down and eat dinner with your son and know that you don't have to worry about how much money this lunch. I mean, obviously it's probably not like, oh, it's an unlimited budget, you know, dinner, but knowing that you're not having to super stress out about like what we're eating for dinner, or I can only feed my son and I can't eat myself. It's so beautiful when we have those moments.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me how much of his ability to do well at his internship and to be liked by his colleagues and to do well at his job is based on him hiding this incredibly huge and important part of himself, which is the fact that he's a single father for his son, and that they have, you know, they are living on the streets or living in homeless shelters or living, you know, very much moment to moment. Because it's you do get the sense that if he really copped to that would be a sign of weakness, and it would not help him in any way. That would take all of this away. But it also means that he has to work, you know, not even twice as hard, 4 times as hard, in order to not only do well, but also keep all of that hidden from his colleagues.
Sorry, didn't want to cut you off.
Go ahead. I was kind of running out of thought there.
Okay. Well, you just made me think of something, which was, and I actually really wanted to talk to you about this. Why I didn't write this down in my notes? I'm upset that I didn't, because I'm glad you made me think of it. But I really wanted to talk about the use of narration in this movie, because I actually really like it in this film.
I liked it too.
Because what you just said made me think of that moment when Chris, you know, through voiceover is explaining, I don't drink a lot of water because I don't want to go to the bathroom, and I'm not hanging up the phone in between calls and all of these things. I have to work through a sheet, and I have to leave by this time earlier before everyone else does, because I either have to pick up Christopher from school or we have to get in line in order to get a bed to sleep in at the place. And I haven't made it to the top of a sheet. Like, I just think that the narration in this movie is used really, really well to communicate things that are really important to know, but we otherwise wouldn't know. And yeah, I don't know. I wasn't sure because I know we've watched other movies with narration before that it didn't work for you, and certain situations didn't work for me either. But for me, it really worked here in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think it works really well in this movie. It's not used too much. Mm-hmm. It's used pretty sparingly, but it's always used to convey important information or to get you into the mindset of Chris at important moments. Yeah, I think it's used very well.
Yeah, and I really liked the different chapters of this part of my life is called running. This part of my life is called being stupid.
Yeah, it made me wonder if that is how the book was structured. If these are the actual names of the chapters in the book, it would make sense. But it was kind of a cute way to work it in.
Yeah, and I think it does a good job of establishing Chris's character as well. Like, he does have this sense of humor. He does have, you know, this witty approach to life. He
narrativizes his own life. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then at the end, he's like, this part of my life is called happiness. Like,
While we're talking about him, his time at his job, the other scene that I really wanted to talk about is the interview scene.
Which one?
Where, so the scene where...
The really nice pants one?
Yes. So basically, Chris his day has been going from bad to worse because he's been painting his apartment because he's about to be evicted, and the only way he can get to stay another week is if he agrees to paint the apartment. And then he gets arrested for failure to pay back taxes.
Parking tickets.
Oh, sorry, parking tickets. Back taxes is later. Parking tickets. And so he has to spend a night in jail. And then from there, he has to run to his interview, still in his, like, slept all night in my paint-covered clothes. He's just in, like, you know, a tank top and a jacket. And
he has to call his now ex-baby mama to pick up his child from school that he said, you cannot see my child anymore.
He is a complete mess. And yet, and I think this is really, like, this is why you want someone like Will Smith in this role. Like, he is able to walk into that room and completely charm the people there and bring them to the point where they're not even questioning why he is in this situation because he's just so confident and so charismatic, and he's funny, and he makes you feel like you know him,
and he's
even though
honest.
he's also hiding things.
He's honest.
It's like,
he's like,
really
I thought about every scenario, but I couldn't come up with one. So here's what happened.
Here's the truth. Yeah. It's this fascinating combination of honesty while also keeping back certain things. But that it just completely works. And you see too why he is so good for this job, you know? Like, you'd never doubt at any moment that he's going to make it, because all of the skills that are needed are right there, and he's so good at connecting with people and talking to them and making them feel comfortable and making them feel safe. Like, those are his superpowers, and it's all right there in that interview. Yeah, it's just wonderful.
I do love that little moment after that too, when Twistle finds him in front of the elevator, and he's like, I don't know how you pulled it off in there, but you did. And then Chris is like, yeah, I'll let you know. I don't know if I can take this position. And Twistle's like, what are you talking about? I fought for you you've been waiting outside of these doors for a month. And it just, again, is another moment where we see kind of that facade in Chris break a little bit, of him being like, okay, I have to look at this in an actual, like, real practical way. This internship doesn't pay. It's 6 months. My circumstances have changed. And I don't know. I just thought that moment was great. I think there's little moments where there are hints towards these people that Chris is really suffering. And I wonder what it says about these people that they don't really see it. You know, they don't really question this idea of, I was arrested for not paying parking tickets, like, or my circumstances have changed. I don't know if I can do this because there's no salary. There's all these opportunities for them to recognize what's going on. But I think because of their privilege, they can't really even see it, which is an interesting thought in and of itself. But yeah.
Well, even just the fact that Chris, he mentions in that scene, like, I was not aware that this internship did not have a salary. Like, the fact that he didn't know
doesn't know that.
Yeah.
Most internships don't have a salary.
Yeah. Like, clearly he's in it. Instantly, you understand what a different position he's in from everyone else who is in this internship. So he's not only competing against them just in the fact of wanting to get a job at the end, but in the sense that I am in such a different position from every single other person in this internship. This is the only thing that I have, whereas everyone else,
they have other
some
options.
Position where they have something they can fall back on. They have someone to support them throughout all of this. Yeah.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about too, because again, there's so many things in this movie that are hinted at, you know, but not, or just like kind of mildly represented, but they don't go full in depth. And I think that that's okay. And I think something that is shown here, at least in my reading of it, Chris does experience racism in his workplace, because the main guy who's kind of overseeing this training program, he treats Chris differently. He makes Chris get him coffee and move his car and constantly do all of these things. And I think it's very clearly showing that Chris is seen in a different way. And not only is he, you know, down on his luck because of all these other circumstances in his life, he also has to work 5 times as hard because he also has to overcome the stigma of being a Black person in this room that I think, in my opinion, very obviously due to the casting and things like that, a lot of these scenarios, whether he's at a football game or driving through a wealthy neighborhood or in this stockbroker, you know, room or whatever, all of these people are white. And I don't think that that is accidental. I think that's an intentional choice. And I just like seeing those little elements there. And it reminds me a lot of my upbringing growing up. Like, my dad would always tell me, like, you as a person of color, you automatically have to represent yourself differently from other people here. And that's something my dad has had to do to get where he is, because he is, you know, a lot of his life, he's been, if not the only, but one of the few people of color in his workspace. And I just like that was something that was added here, just like another layer to this man's very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because when I saw it, it wasn't immediately clear to me that it was that there was a racial element to that. I couldn't tell whether it was that or whether it was just all of the interns are expected to fetch coffee and we're only seeing, because we don't really see how the other interns are treated. We're just seeing how Chris is treated. So I didn't really have a sense of whether he's being singled out for that or not, but it completely makes sense that that would be a really important part of the story, that he is experiencing that kind of treatment. So yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a automatic reality of people of color working in situations like that, especially in this. I mean, it's still this way now, but especially back then, it was even more so a thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally makes sense for the time, for the context. Absolutely.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so funny. As we keep talking, I'm like, because I think initially I said, oh yeah, there's 3 moments when I teared up. And I'm like, no, there's like a million of them.
Yeah. What are some of the other moments that you teared up?
I mean, so let's see. We talked about the imagination scene. Another one is, another one is the moment when the "You're a Good Papa" scene. It's such a brief moment, but it's just so beautiful. I feel like, I mean, even when I was little and I didn't really understand much about what it means to be a parent. I mean, I'm not a parent now, but I understand more so now than I did back then. But even when I was little, just like me watching this little boy who has told his father that he's happy. So he doesn't have a very in-depth understanding of what is happening to them, but he does see how hard his dad is working. And the fact that this whole movie, he doesn't really get recognition. Obviously, he gets the job at the end, so he gets recognition, but like there isn't really any personable, genuine, like, thank yous from people who know him as a person. And I think that's something where when you're in really difficult times, having one person who knows you speak into your experience in that sort of way, especially when it's your kid that you're working so hard to like help and provide for and make sure that they're living the best life they can possibly live. It's just the fact that this little boy sees that his dad is working hard and recognizes that this is the moment when I need to say this to you. It's just, I don't know how you didn't, like, what's wrong with you?
Honestly, and please don't hate me, I'm glad that that moment moved you so much. I didn't really like that line.
What?
I thought that was the one line that was just a little too cheesy, or a little like, I didn't really believe a child that age would say that in that moment. But
dang,
I don't know. Now you're like describing it in this beautiful, passionate way, and I'm like, man, now I feel bad.
I mean, you don't need to feel bad. I think you're a heartless human being, but
yeah, it's true. It's true.
No, I think honestly, another reason why it hits me too is that I call my dad Papa. And not a lot of people do that. A lot of people call their dads like dad. So, which is fine. But I think, I don't know. I just think it strikes a chord for me. And,
I love the idea of it as you're describing it. It's just something about the phrasing of it. I just didn't believe that a 5-year-old child would say that to their father in that situation. But I like the idea of it.
It's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could totally see a 5-year-old saying that, because it's not him saying like, thank you, father, for all of the blah, blah. It's literally just like, you're a good papa, which is not really a grammatically, incredible sentence. It's a very simple thing to say. It's just like, I just think you're a good papa, and that's the only way I know how to say it, so I'm going to say it. Like, I could see my 5-year-old niece saying that, just being like, you're a good whatever, and I just think it's beautiful. It says everything. It says everything just in very simple words. It expresses so much that he doesn't know how to verbalize in this one sentence of "you're a good papa." I just think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something about the way that it's expressing this understanding of the adult's need for validation in their particular role that I just didn't quite strike me that a 5-year-old would have that maturity to be able to understand that this is something that he would find really
I don't think
meaningful.
that's the case, though. I think that's the reason it's beautiful to me. I don't think it's, in my opinion, I don't think it's Christopher recognizing like, oh, my dad really needs to hear this right now. I think it's just something that he's genuinely feeling in that moment, and he just says it without even understanding what it means. And it just happens to be at this moment when it hits Chris in such a, like, it's what he needed to hear more than anything else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But his son doesn't even know that. He just happens to say it because he's just a kid and he wants to say, you're a good papa. But the fact that he hasn't thought that through as to like, why am I saying this? But the fact that he just says it means that it's coming from just this true place of, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to whatever. This is just how I feel. And it's just this, I don't know, kids have the ability of just like being so real and so true and so honest because they just say whatever. And the fact that when he's saying whatever is this deep, authentic emotion, and he's just saying it. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. Like, it's just, I don't know. I think it's amazing. I think that if it had been this thought planned, I know that you need this, it would have been still beautiful, but like, okay, great. But this is like, no, he just recognizes in this moment. He has a genuine feeling of like, you're a good papa. And he is, you know, it's just,
he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it really worked for you.
Yeah. And I think that comes on the tails of too, another moment that I teared up at, which is when, man, it's just like now having a 5-year-old niece, it's all different now, but I can't imagine if I had a child, God forbid, but, like that moment when they're racing towards the bus and he drops his Captain America.
Oh my goodness. That scene hurt me. I was so sad.
It's
that
like,
poor child. It's literally the one toy that he has left apart from his basketball.
Yeah. And it's just, you know, Chris doesn't even understand what's happening. And then when they get on the bus and he looks back and sees the Captain America on the ground, again, it's one of those things where Will Smith's performance, like you just see in this very brief moment that he recognizes the significance of this, you know, action figure being left behind. And it's just a great performance moment for both of them.
Yeah. It made me really, not just that moment, multiple moments throughout the movie, but I feel like I would love to read an essay about the real Christopher from the perspective of a grown-up looking back at what that childhood would have been. I mean, in real life, like you said, the real Christopher was only a toddler, and so he probably wouldn't actually have many memories of this. But if he had been this age or a little bit older, it would be really interesting to hear about his perspective on what it was like, his memories of it, how he's processed it, and how that has affected him as he's grown up. Just because, you know, when you're that age, you don't understand, like, the idea that if we don't catch the bus and get in to be in line in time, that is the difference between us having a place to sleep tonight versus us having to go and sleep on the floor of some unsafe bathroom or worse. You know, all you can understand is I dropped my toy and my father won't let me pick it up. You know, like, it's not until you get older that you really start to understand what was actually going on, that you couldn't comprehend at the time, the larger decisions that your parent was having to make. So yeah, I would be really curious to know how someone in that circumstance would process those things later on.
Yeah. I just thought about this. Can you imagine going through all of this, but having your child be like 2 years old? Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
I know.
Oh man.
In some ways, yeah, I was like, in some ways, like, their even more limited development might make it easier, and then in others it would make it much harder. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Oh, anyway. But yeah.
By the way, I just had this question throughout, but you know, he could not pay for housing for the two of them. How is he still paying for that daycare? Or is he just really behind?
He's just not paying.
Okay.
I think Mrs. Chu says at some point, she goes, "You're not paying me anyway," when he starts to complain about, you know, watching The Love Boat.
Oh.
and she's like, if you want him to not watch, you take him to another daycare. And then she's like, it's not like you pay me anyway. So
yeah, okay.
That's established kind of in passing early on.
Gotcha. This is why we need more affordable childcare for people who are in situations like this.
We need a lot more of lots of
we need a lot of things.
Yeah. So I guess like I think the last I also teared up during the moment when they get the hotel room and they're both sleeping in the chair, which I think is absolutely beautiful. Just like, I don't know, I feel like in this movie we don't really ever see Chris sleep. Like even when he has his apartment in the beginning, you see him, Linda would wake up and he's laying there wide awake and all of these circumstances. I think we see him fall asleep once on the train. But aside from that, like this is the only time when we actually see him asleep and he's with his son and they're in this chair. It's like, wow.
I know. I did have this thought too watching the movie. And again, this is like the movie magic of casting a handsome and charismatic movie star as your protagonist. So I was like, this man is not sleeping. He is somehow managing to pull an incredibly demanding internship while also looking after his son while being, homeless. They're probably
studying late into the night,
studying late into the night.
Bone scanners.
Yes, they're probably eating junk because that's what they can probably afford. Like he is not healthy. Like I hope that as soon as he has a job, he is able to start eating some fruits and vegetables. He's able to get his 8 hours. Like this poor man his health is probably going to give out if this has gone on for any longer.
Yeah, I mean the part at the end when he's like, this part of my life, this part right here is called happiness. I mean, think about, again, like going back to what I was saying in the beginning, how does this movie define happiness? I think it has so many different definitions. But I think at that point at the end, it's like happiness means I can put food on the table. I can sleep. I can pay for my son's daycare. I can find somewhere to live. I can have a job. I can, like, it's all of these different things. And so I think that ending is like, yeah, I think he's going to be able to like have a good meal and fall asleep and all of those things, like
these little tiny things,
that
so many of us take for granted that he has not been able to have for a very long time.
Yeah. And it's just, I'm so happy for him, which obviously like, of course that's the final moment where I'm sobbing, of just like, again, given the values that were instilled in me from a very young age, like there aren't many times in life when your really, really hard work actually pays off in the way that you want it to. And so seeing that actually happen for somebody and knowing that like this is a true story and it did actually happen to somebody, it's just, it's really emotional. And I'm so happy for him. I'm not going to think about like what his future is of the stock program. Like I don't, I'm sure it's not smooth sailing from here on out and all of those things, but just seeing someone accomplish a goal, like it's kind of similar to, you're probably not going to understand this at all and that's fine. But like me and my dad, whenever we watch the Olympics and we see someone win gold, like we're both crying. We're like, I mean, how many,
that's so sweet.
Like how many years of hard work went into wanting to be the best athlete in the world, and for how many people did it not work out and you finally got there? Like that's huge. And it's just when it's like a 1 in a billion chance that these things can actually happen for people, and yeah, like a lot of people in poverty, and most of them don't, they're unable to get out of it and have this sort of reward for their hard work. And which is a whole other discussion in and of itself, but I'm glad that it's just really nice to see it happen for somebody. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love being inspired. And this movie is just incredibly, incredibly inspiring. It's so inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the way you're talking about it, I feel like it really activates the same sort of themes and emotions that you love about sports movies.
Oh, absolutely.
So like it makes so much sense that you love this movie.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I'll keep saying it over and over, but like it just taps into this like value system that I've had instilled in me from birth of just like give everything you've got in everything that you do, and it may or may not pay off in the way that you want, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth it. And so, you know, when it does actually pay off, it's just not common. And so, you know, you can hope that it will. And movies like this help me continue to hope that maybe it will someday, you know, and I just love celebrating other people. I'm not someone who gets jealous. Well, no, that's actually not true. How many times on this podcast have I been like, Damien Chazelle, like, I'm happy for you, but also fuck you. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's something to be said.
But you're not aspiring to become a stockbroker in San Francisco, so.
No, exactly. I have no personal, like, I have no skin in that game.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just nice to see nice people get what they want, you know?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's great. Gosh, I just can't believe that you didn't tear up at all in this movie. That's just wild to me. Absolutely insane. Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
I kind of love too how low key the final moment where he gets that job is, and like how it's like, again, how good his performance is. You can tell that this is like, he is so happy and relieved, and this is just the culminating moment of his life, but he's able to stay relatively cool about it. Like, he's very clearly happy, and you know, the men in the room who are giving him the job are really excited to see how happy he is, but you know, he's not like jumping up and down and like waving his arms. He's just like, all right, thank you, you know. And it's almost more exciting even because of that, because of just, you know, he says so little, but everything that you need to know about how he's feeling is all on his face, you know.
I think for me, the emotional impact of that experience really culminates for me when he's sprinting to Mrs. Chu's and then he picks up Christopher and gives him a hug. Like,
so sweet.
Obviously it's super powerful when they tell him he gets the job, and then when he's walking in the street, and we have that parallel to in the beginning when he was looking at all these happy people and he wasn't one of them, and now he is one of them, type of thing. But for me, it was really like when we see him running and then he gives Christopher a hug, because this is all for him and getting to share this moment with him. It, like, that's when I'm like, oh! Like, ah!
Okay, can I say one thing though, is when they give him the job and Mr. Frome is like, pays him back that $5 as kind of a joking thing. I was like, I feel like you knew at the time what this meant for him.
Yeah.
You bastard. Like,
I also think it's been like a few days since that happened. I'm like, you really waited to give him those $5.
You could have paid him back pretty quick, much sooner.
Like, all right. But you know, they had to have it
for
that
dramatic
way for the movie.
purposes. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. I also love the way that they tell him of just like, you know, you've got a shirt on today, make sure you wear another one tomorrow because it's going to be your first day. But, yeah. I just, the fact that I don't know, and I would love to maybe like go more in depth on this on my own time, but I don't know how this movie manages to pull off the concept of, from the very beginning, we know how this movie is going to end. And yet somehow I don't ever get to a point where I'm like, all right, like, oh, this is okay. Like, we knew this was going to happen. It's just kind of like, I don't know how this movie managed to pull that off. I don't know if it's just the acting performances or what it is, but somehow it does some sort of, it jumps through some sorts of loops that it's able to be predictable without being predictable.
Yeah. I don't really know. It is impressive too, because all of the hardships that he experiences are kind of set up very early on in the movie. So, you know, the sort of final blow that really leads him to his darkest period is the tax money, when the government decides, because you didn't pay your taxes, we have the right to go in and basically seize all of your assets. And that is set up so early on in the movie, when his wife is asking if he's going to pay the taxes, and he's like, no, I'm just going to file another extension. It's clearly like, this has worked so far, and there are so many other things going on in his life. This is so far down the list of priorities that he has, and it's understandable. He completely forgets about it. until that moment that it just out of nowhere swoops in and completely changes their circumstances. And so it is a really good kind of setup and then logical payoff, and then you have to deal with the consequences of that. And there is a long period of that movie where it really is just bad, and then it's worse, and then you think it can't get worse, and then it gets even worse, you know? And so it really feels like you're clawing back every bit of success that he gets. And so even though you've been, when it happens at the end, it doesn't feel like a surprise, but it feels earned.
Yeah. I mean, I think that also the ebb and flow of it too, because it's not all negative, because we have these little moments where we can come up for air, you know, because it's like, it's bad. And then we have this moment where, you know, his voiceover says, you know, we sold 2 more scanners, we just might make it. And then after that is when he loses the $600. And then, you know, and then he finds the scanner from the guy who thinks it's a time machine. And then it's like, okay, there's one more thing, but then he finds out it's broken. And then we find out he can fix it. And then like, it's not, or even just... like
he gets evicted from his apartment, but they're fine for a little bit because he has his friend who can drive them over to that other cheaper hotel and they can stay there. So it's not like they're immediately destitute.
Can I just say, fuck Wayne? Like, Wayne is the worst.
I'm glad that we're talking about this because he fully sucks. I was actually very curious about this throughout the movie, and at a certain point I had to just tell myself, Geneva, like, turn off your brain and stop asking these questions, because clearly this is the way it is, and that's the way it needs to be for the story that's being told, and so just, you don't need to wonder why. But, you know, he doesn't seem to have any family around. Linda doesn't seem to have any family around. Wayne seems to be the only sort of friend that he has, but Wayne is clearly a terrible friend who won't pay him back $14 freaking dollars. So yeah, I don't know if it's just that he's been working for so long that he just has kind of broken off all of his, not like intentionally, but, you know, just like been isolated by the fact that he had to work so hard, and that he doesn't have this support structure when things start to go south. But yeah, I was just kind of struck by that like there is no one that he can call in this movie apart from Linda, and then when Linda leaves, it really is just him.
I actually think that's pretty common.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's, you know, to the movie's detriment at all. I think it is very common, and I think it's good that the movie portrays that, because I think a lot of people are in those circumstances.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think there are a lot of people in America that they look at people who are impoverished or homeless, and they have this perspective of like, oh, it's all their fault. If they were to just work harder, they could get out. And I think that this movie is complex, and that I think, like we were saying in the beginning, like with this movie, you can kind of see what you want to see. And you could come out of this movie having that message of like, oh, well, if, you know, these types of people were to just work harder, like, look at what's possible. Therefore, it's their fault that they're stuck there. But I also think there's another way to look at this in terms of like, you know, he did try and make certain decisions, and things didn't pan out the way that he thought. And given his circumstances, he's doing what he can, and he's not in control of everything. And I don't know. I just don't feel like this movie is simplistic in terms of saying like, work hard and you'll get out. Like, I think this is not the story that the movie is trying to tell. Like, if it was, it definitely could have gone way more in depth on the systems that actually are existing here. But at the same time, I don't think it completely shies away from those systems. Like, it does make reference to, like, you know, the government being able to just take your money, even though it's kind of the government's money, but it's not really, you know, whatever, taxes, blah, blah, blah. Like, there are certain things where it's like, did he buy into a pyramid scheme? Absolutely he did. But like, you know, that happens to people all the time. And like, there are just, you know, is he dealing with racism in this internship? Yes, he is. And, you know, is he struggling with the fact that he has a child and childcare? Yes. And all of these different things. So it doesn't hide the systems that exist, which I think is good. But it doesn't go all in on them, which I think is also good, because that's not the story that this movie is trying to tell. But unfortunately, I think there's, like I said, you can choose how you want to see this. And there's probably people that see it one way, and there's hopefully people that see it the other way too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I would love it if the movie had gone a little bit more into the systems that are at play that keep people in poverty, but it does a very good job of portraying what this sort of life is like and what sort of opportunities are there in terms of like organizations and things that are in place to help, but also a lot of the kind of predatory systems and organizations and people who, you know, keep the cycle of poverty going. So the how difficult the decisions that need to be made are, how much living from, you know, not even paycheck to paycheck, but just, you know, tiny bit of money that you can acquire day by day, you know, how that limits your ability to make any sort of long-term decisions that would help you to escape that cycle. So yeah, it does a very good job of showing some of those things without really getting too preachy about it, I guess.
And I find it interesting the way that it portrays the wealthy people too, because I think on the one hand, it very unabashedly like shows that they're privileged. Like, I don't think it's hiding that. These are very privileged people. So much so that they're able to like maintain this bubble that they live in. But at the same time, I don't think the movie completely villainizes them of like, oh, look at these wealthy people and they suck. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's like,
yeah, well, it's like it can't villainize them because we're rooting for Chris to become one of them. So there is that kind of complex, like,
yeah,
it can only go so far.
It's interesting because part of me is like, I struggle with it because I want to see the nasty sides of these people too, because guarantee you some of these people are nasty. But at the same time, I don't want that in this story. Like that's not what I want here. And that's not what this movie needs. And so it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely something where if this was like a full-on realistic retelling, then it's like, okay, well, then we need to really go into that. But so, yeah, I don't know. I definitely see the issues there in terms of like, there's a lot that we're kind of glossing over, but I'm also like, but that's not what I'm here to watch. So get out.
Yeah. Yeah, but, fair enough.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think. Is there anything else?
Trying to think if there are any like particular moments or scenes that I really wanted to talk about too, because there are just a lot of really great little moments in this movie.
We didn't talk too much about the bone density scanners. Do you have
anything
about to say about that? Thing. Or I mean, it's obviously like a huge part of the movie, but it's kind of like he's trying to sell them, but it's not working, and so he loses them, then he finds them. That little moment where Christopher's like, "You're not supposed to have any of those. You have two so now."
It's like he goes to work with one and he comes back with two. Yeah. It's like they're multiplying. Yeah, I don't have a huge amount to say about them. I did like the moment where he pays the hippie girl to watch it, and he's like, "This part of my life is called being stupid." Because you're just like, no, don't do it. And then, of course, what you think is going to happen is exactly what happens.
Because he's like, I don't want people in there to see me walking in carrying this thing. And then by the end of the movie, he's walking in there every day carrying a suitcase, and one of those machines.
Yeah.
But I suppose he's already in the program by then. So what are they going to do? Kick him out? But
no, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is kind of funny, though, like imagining the people who steal them from him, then trying to go and sell them and being like, oh, the guy I stole it from can't even sell them. Like, well, that's
what he tells them. He's like, I can't even sell it and it's my job. So
yeah.
I mean, the other guy just thinks it's a straight up time machine.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, he's not trying to sell it. He's trying to
oh my gosh. Also the fact that like when we find that he only has like $21 or $31 left in his bank account or something like that, and then we see that he goes to the store and 8 of those dollars he has to spend on buying materials to fix the broken. Like, oh my
that's
God.
Right. Yes.
That's like a third of the money you have left that you have to spend on fixing this machine. That you might not even be. Oh no! At that point, he does know he can sell it because there's that one guy who's like,
yeah, there's the one doctor who's
interested if it's fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I guess like my last thing that maybe potentially we could touch on, because I feel like everything else we've kind of talked about. Do you have any thoughts on Mr. Ribbon the guy who's like, hey, come with us to the football game. And then he's like, nah, we don't want your business.
Yeah.
But I did
that was kind of an interesting little digression because it, like, career-wise, nothing comes out of it. Chris is not in the end able to sign him.
Career-wise things come out of it.
Wait, what do you mean?
Career-wise, he ends up getting like 10 clients from the people who were giving him cards at the end of the football game.
Oh, really? Oh,
he says
you're right.
that at the end. They're like, how did you get all of these clients? He's like, I went to a 49ers game and all these people were there and gave me their cards and I signed them all.
Oh, you're totally right. I didn't even pick up on that connection.
So it has huge payoffs.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah.
I did catch this time though, which I hadn't caught in the past, that Mr. Ribbon says to him, he's like, I wasn't aware when you called me that you're only in the internship program. So I don't think that Mr. Ribbon was necessarily misleading him. I think that he thought he was like a full-time person who actually worked for Dean Witter, not just like this intern guy who's kind of just trying to figure out if he can do this or not, you know? Yeah, because he's like, there's no way I'm going to trust my finances to some intern, which, you know,
completely understandable.
Like, I get it.
Yeah, but he was also like, I don't know, I like his character. It is, and it is another great demonstration of why Chris is so good at this, because he is so just, they have this really immediate kind of connection. Chris is just really good at kind of bringing the human to it, you know, obviously kind of hiding his circumstances and with ulterior motives of wanting to sign him to it. But
why don't you leave that thing in your car? Oh, I got stung by a bee.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Little Christopher is like, we don't have a car. And he's like, my back. Stop talking.
Yep.
But they're just that whole like, oh yeah, we were in the neighborhood, so I just wanted to stop by and say sorry for standing you up. You know, I know you must have waited. And he's like, yeah, a little bit. And I don't know, it was a nice little moment. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of like profound thoughts except that it was kind of an interesting little incident.
Yeah. It reminded me though of that little moment where they're walking up to the house and Chris asked Christopher, like, he's trying to explain to him what possibly means, and he's like, what does probably mean? And he goes, we're maybe going, there's a good chance we're going to the game. Then he goes, what does possibly mean? It means we're not going to the game.
So cute.
I mean,
he's like, you pick up on it quick.
The writing for Christopher in this movie is so accurate to a 5-year-old. I mean, I'm going to keep saying this, but like me having a niece who's 5, I'm like, all of these things she would say, like the fact that he's asking questions about where are we going? What are we doing? Why do you have 2 of those? You're supposed to only have 1. Like, you know, all of those things. It's just, he's just very, very well written, but also super well behaved.
Yeah, very well behaved.
Yeah, I love that one moment though when Chris asks him like, hey, do you want to come with me to sell some scanners? He's like, no. But he knows he has to go anyway. He's like, but that's not what I want to do today. Oh my gosh, that moment when they go to the beach, so good. Oh, I just took Christopher to the beach.
I know, it's just so nice to see the 2 of them actually have like 5 minutes of like something nice, you know?
Yeah, it was so great. Yeah, I love this movie. It's incredibly inspiring to me, and I'm very sad that I haven't watched it in like over 10 years. I need to watch this movie more often because it's really good.
Question for you. Do you have any thoughts on the significance of the mural outside of Christopher's daycare where happiness is misspelled? Which then becomes the title of the movie.
Not off the top of my head. Maybe, I mean, I can try and come up with something on the spot, but maybe probably something about like happiness is whatever you want it to be. Like you can define it on your own. Like there's no one true version of happiness. I don't know. That's just right off the top of my head. I honestly don't know. Do you have an answer? Yeah,
not really. I mean, something similar in the way of like, you know, we pursue happiness and sometimes we take wrong turnings or we make mistakes, but it's kind of the intention or the struggle for it that matters or something like that.
Yeah. I also thought it was funny because I feel like nowadays there wouldn't be a movie that would talk so highly of Thomas Jefferson. I feel like so many people now are like,
yeah, I kind of thought that as well.
He wrote the Constitution, but like,
yeah,
he had a lot of problems. He's
yeah. But there is something very like, I don't know. And again, me, from this sort of 2023, like everything's a lot more sort of, I don't know, political and fraught right now.
Right.
Something really nice about watching a movie from
right.
pre 2008, pre the Wall Street crash, pre like so many things that have happened in the last, however many years. Just there's something very pure and innocent about it in a way. Like you can just be so much more sincere about things in a way that we cannot be today.
Yeah. It was post 9/11, so that was
post
a big
9/11
happen, but yeah.
Pre the Wall Street crash, which is probably you could not make this movie after 2008.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No. Yeah. You're just making me think of there's all of these things that I'm sure you've seen them that exist on social media where it's like millennials see this new thing happen. It's like, well, we've already been through more things in like just 15 years of our lives than any other. Like, it's like, 2001, like, or like 9/11, great. Pandemic, great. Political things, great. Aliens, great.
Yeah. Multiple
what you
wars,
got next
multiple like recessions and depressions.
Yeah. Great recession, great. Ukraine, great. Like, awesome. What's next?
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, I'm even looking at like the whole description here on Wikipedia, and I feel like we spoke about most of the things. So I feel good with moving on if you are.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Cool. So this movie, which I'm not surprised by it, people aren't going to give a perfect score to a movie like this, but that's fine. To me, it's a 4.5-star movie, and that's fine. But this movie has a 64 on Metacritic and a 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. But I do remember it had a significantly higher audience score. I think it was in the 80s on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
But I pulled 3 reviews. The first 2 are kind of short. The last one is a little bit longer, and I thought it was interesting. I mean, all of these are interesting, but so the first one comes from Michael Sragow at the Baltimore Sun, and he says, the tough beauty of the picture is that it lets each viewer weigh the costs and benefits to Gardner. It's a genuinely transporting, inspirational movie because it's also a cautionary tale. It doesn't downplay the hero's occasional clumsiness or pig-headedness, which I agree with. Like I was kind of saying before, I don't think that Chris is seen as this like Jesus character. I think we do see that he has flaws and is a bit prideful at times and is stupid, as he says. Like he is stupid at certain moments that has consequences. But anyway, yeah. And then the second one comes from Michael Phillips at the Chicago Tribune, and he says, while the film is roughly half grit and half sugar, it works because Smith sticks to a tougher, more rewarding recipe of 99.9% grit and only 0.1% sugar. I really liked that a lot.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And like I said at the beginning, this is a movie where my sort of half remembered impression of it was that it was pretty kind of cheesy and sugary and sentimental, and I was surprised. It's really not. I mean, there's a bit of sentiment there, but it's a lot grittier and more grounded and gritty than I had remembered. So yeah, I feel like this is one of those movies where like the poster and the trailer can make it appear to be a much
gosh, the trailer's so bad.
Yeah. A much more sentimental movie than it actually is.
Yeah, and I think that this review points to like it has a lot to do with Smith's performance and the way that he approaches it, or the way that he's directed to approach it, or whatever. Because it could have been super sugary, but yeah.
I'll ask this when we get to the awards section.
Okay. Go ahead. So this last one I thought was really interesting. I tried to do some research on the source of this, but it was kind of a rabbit hole, and I was like, I'm not going to go down this. So I don't really know whether I support this source or not, but I thought the review was interesting. So this comes from Peter Rayner at the Christian Science Monitor. Don't know what I tried to do research, and I was like, whatever.
Oh, yeah. Christian Science is a sect of Christianity that I'm not sure exactly how you would define it, but it's I'm assuming that this particular newspaper is like affiliated with that sect, but I've seen a lot of reviews by it. Like it seems to be have like regular film reviewers on rotation.
Yeah, I just didn't know, like, is this supporting certain whatever?
Yeah, we can talk more on off mic about it.
But yeah, but I found the review to be super interesting. So this is what it says. Set in the Reagan 80s, The Pursuit of Happyness is an unabashed advertisement for better living through financial gain. Director Gabriele Muccino, who previously made 2 acclaimed Italian films, presents Steve Conrad's screenplay without a shred of irony. Perhaps this is because Muccino is seeing the American dream through a foreigner's eyes. Although the suggestion is planted that the homeless situation was also a product of the 80s zeitgeist, we are encouraged to applaud Chris's unalloyed passion for moneyed success. Since the film is framed as a story of a father who will do anything to help his son, it's not difficult to accept this premise, and yet there is something a bit cold-blooded about it. The American dream encompasses more than the brokerage house bonanza that this film sets forth as the pinnacle of achievement. It's also impossible to watch this movie and not, on some level, beyond reason, succumb. The Pursuit of Happyness is an expert piece of calculation, a male weepy engineered for the whole family. I thought that was interesting because it kind of points to a lot of different aspects of things that this movie addresses and doesn't address and all of that. So
yeah, that is interesting, especially that point that he makes about how this movie's very positive sort of portrayal of the American dream, how we are seeing that through the eyes of a non-American director. I hadn't looked up who the director was, so I hadn't really put that together beforehand, but that's interesting.
Yeah, and I like how it kind of addresses that, despite all of these problematic things, we're able to accept the premise because it's a father fighting for his son. And because of that, it's almost impossible to watch this and on some level beyond reason succumb. Like you have to succumb to it in certain ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as far as awards, Will Smith did get an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Aside from that, there wasn't anything notable from the Academy. Jaden Smith was nominated for, I think, Best New Actor at the Critics' Choice Awards. So he got a little bit of recognition at different award ceremonies as well. But as far as, the Academy, just one nomination. So did you have something to say on that?
Yeah, I was actually going to, because I hadn't looked up whether this movie got any nominations. And I was going to say, if he didn't get nominated, he really should have been nominated. But I was also wondering, Will Smith had previously been nominated for Ali, right? This was not his first nomination?
I believe he was previously nominated for Ali, yes.
Okay, yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just those two. And then
and then he won for King Richard?
No.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. You said King Richard. You said King Richard, and you made me think of that. There's some other movie where he's like a football coach or something. Anyway, my brain was thinking of a different movie, and I'm like, no, he did not win for that at all. But yes, you're right.
I was like, Tatum, it was an incredibly
yes, he did win for
notable
King
Oscars.
Why?
Why? What happened?
Yeah, you still haven't seen that movie, right?
King Richard? No. It was the one that I didn't get to before the Academy Awards.
Why? Because it's a sports movie?
That certainly had something to do with it. Although I would like to see it. I think it's been on Max for a while, and I have kind of had it in my queue and just have not gotten around to it. But,
there were a couple articles that came out at the time of Will Smith being nominated for playing an inspirational father figure. Who would have thought? Because he's done that a couple times. Mm-hmm. But anyway, all right, cool. So I guess kind of just to briefly sum up, Geneva, is there anything that I guess you can repeat that's gonna stick with you with this movie?
Yeah. I was really pleasantly surprised by my rewatch of this movie. I think I'll definitely watch it again. It is very moving, even if I wasn't physically in tears. It is,
which
very
still
moving.
Shocks me, but that's okay.
Will Smith is truly excellent. Jaden Smith is really, it's a really great child performance. I am still a bit conflicted about the way that this movie kind of portrays wealth and the American dream and stock brokerage. But I do think there is a lot of realness and a lot of great messaging in this movie, just about the idea of perseverance and hard work and sacrifice and love for other people. And yeah, I really like this movie a lot, so I'm really glad that you picked it.
Yeah, me too, honestly. And I don't know if you know this about like stock brokerage things, but it's fugazi, it's fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's fairy dust.
I have no idea what you're saying.
What? You don't know what that is?
No, what
is
that?
That's like, that is the scene that basically got Matthew McConaughey nominated for supporting actor in Wolf of Wall Street, when he sits down with Leonardo DiCaprio and he's explaining to him about Wall Street. He's like, it's fugazi, it's fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's fairy dust.
Yeah, I never saw that movie. I never watched that scene. I'll need to go and watch that scene now.
You should watch that scene. That was during the McConaissance when everyone was obsessed with Matthew McConaughey, and that one scene, because he's only in that one scene in the movie, and I was like, nominate him for an Oscar.
Yeah. I definitely feel like I've seen people post that one scene in different places as something really notable.
Because that's the scene where it's like the
yes, okay, that's the part of it that I've seen. Okay, that I've seen. I just haven't seen the larger.
It's purely just Matthew McConaughey being like put in front of the camera and being like, Matthew McConaughey, be you, but the stockbroker version of you. And like Leonardo DiCaprio sitting there like, okay, I'm gonna try and go along with this, but this is weird. Like, people are staring at us.
You know, because I haven't really watched that scene, I've only seen like a few sentences or a few seconds of him doing the pounding his chest thing. I weirdly get that scene mixed up with the scene from Social Network where Mark Zuckerberg sits down with Justin Timberlake's character and he's like, don't call it the Facebook. Call it Facebook. It's cleaner. I don't know why.
So
it was just
interesting.
Something
They're
about the
very different.
two men in business sitting down at a table for one scene and imparting wisdom. I get it mixed up.
Now I just want to watch The Social Network. Ugh.
Such a good
Sorry,
movie.
I left my Pradas at the cleaner along with my fuck you flip-flops, you pretentious douchebag.
Andrew Garfield. What a treasure.
So good. Yeah. You might want to wait to cash it though. I wrote it on the account you froze or whatever it is.
I am not giving you my full attention. I am giving you the bare minimum of my attention.
The limited amount. Anyway, I need to end this episode.
Yeah, go ahead.
So anything from this movie that I guess I feel like I've already said all of it, but I mean, it's just those really moving scenes, but overall just this concept of, working really hard and, having that hard work pay off. I have to hope and believe that someday that will happen for me and for the people, for my loved ones that are also working very hard. This movie is just very inspiring. And I, similar to, the quote that I chose in the beginning, I'm someone who's taken that message to heart. Like I will never let anyone tell me that I can't do something. And I think that is a really important message to take through life. And I have carried that with me. So, and I will continue to carry that with me. So yeah. But that, I guess, concludes our discussion of Pursuit of Happyness. I really enjoyed this. But yeah, so Geneva, what are we talking about next week? That's happened a few times. You're like, oh, wait a minute.
Next week. Oh, sorry. I hadn't actually looked at what we were talking about next week. I'm really excited. Dang it. Not dang it, but I'm excited. Next week, we are talking about a classic comedy of the 80s that I feel like no one else has seen, and I'm desperately trying to get other people to watch. We're talking about This Is Spinal Tap from 1984. We'll talk about it next week. I
always thought it was called Spinal Tap. I didn't know it was called This Is Spinal Tap.
Yeah, that's the full technical title. Most people just shorten it to Spinal Tap. I usually just shorten it to Spinal Tap.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So come back next week, you guys. And thanks for listening to this. And I hope I'm not the only one who cried. If anyone else cried, send us an email and let me know, because I want to know
It's
I'm
funny
not
because
alone.
I am normally such a crier. Maybe I just wasn't for whatever reason, just wasn't in a crying mood. I don't know. But
Maybe you just don't value hard work.
Maybe that's true.
Geneva, the least hardworking person I know.
Yes.
Anyway.
I want everything handed to me. Now.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpickpod@gmail.com. Our theme song was composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like the show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.